One day the rebels arrived in our village. We all fled into the bush. We expected them to leave after some hours, but they never left. We survived eating edible leaves and some berries. After some weeks, we realized that we could not go back. We walked several days and now we are here waiting for help. We lost everything. We have no future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, these were the words of an elderly, internally displaced person who I met almost 10 years ago on one of my missions. This man didn't know about the guiding principles on internal displacement. And even if he had known them, he probably would have been too polite and too exhausted to ask the obvious question. And, sir, can you tell me what these guiding principles can do to help rebuild my life and give me back my future? This is about a glass being half empty, but also a glass being half full. 20 years ago, when Francis Deng, the then representative of the Secretary General on Internally Displaced Persons, submitted the guiding principles in spring 1998 to the then UN Human Rights Commission, those of us who had been involved in drafting this document felt very, very good indeed about the product. At the same time, we were rather frustrated because the Commission had decided at that time not to welcome the guiding principles, but just to take note of them. 10 years later, in 2008, I gave a keynote address on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the guiding principles. And this is what I said then. I said, looking back at what has been achieved during the past 10 years, it is fair to say that the glass is, at the same time, half empty and half full. Half full insofar as the guiding principles have become the normative point of reference for everyone dealing with internal displacement. Whoever talks about the rights of internally displaced persons today is referring to this important document. Second, I said, the guiding principles have achieved a solid standing as a document that, although legally non-binding, is based upon and reflecting binding international human rights and humanitarian law. And I referred to the World Summit outcome document, where in September 2005, the heads of state and government had recognized the guiding principles as, and I quote, an important international framework for the protection of internally displaced persons. Third, I highlighted that the guiding principles continue to guide and assist governments in all parts of the world to better discharge their responsibilities in protecting and assisting their own citizens who had to flee armed conflict or disasters or violence. I referred to the about 15 countries that already had adopted legislation or policies or strategies specifically addressing internal displacement, and mentioned others who were in the process of doing so. And last but not least, I said these principles empower IDPs themselves by providing them with the knowledge that they possess rights. Rights which remain their legal and moral entitlements, even if at that time they are violated. What I said then is still largely true today. The Guiding Principles Authority has been reiterated by an impressive number of General Assembly and Human Rights Council resolutions. The Inter-American and European Human Rights Courts have repeatedly invoked them in judgments finding violations of the rights of IDPs. Africa, in a very important step, has transformed the content of the principles into the legally binding Kampala Convention, adopted in 2009, and the number of countries with laws, policies, strategies specifically addressing internal displacement has grown in an impressive manner. And still, the glass is hardly full. It's empty. We're facing a series of serious challenges. The number of persons internally displaced by armed conflict, by violence, by disasters, including the adverse effects of climate change, is at an all-time high. And so is the number of those remaining in protracted displacement, being stuck in situations where they have a life shaped by marginalization, vulnerability, hopelessness, where there is no future, where they neither can go back nor integrate and resume normal lives at the place where they are. What can we do to better prevent internal displacement in the context of armed conflict or the adverse effects of climate change? What can we do to safeguard the rights of affected people to seek refuge in safer locations? How can we ensure humanitarian access to IDPs during armed conflict when such access is denied for no good reasons, or when humanitarian workers are kidnapped, attacked, or killed? How can we prevent internal displacement becoming protracted? How can we address protracted displacement in ways that makes it possible for IDPs to rebuild and for host communities to resume normal lives, to find durable solutions ending displacement? And despite the excellent work done by IDMC, how can we ensure that we have the data, the necessary knowledge and analysis that helps us to address all these challenges? There is no space for me to provide answers to these questions here. But let me focus on one issue I think is particularly important in this regard. Many of the problems I just mentioned are linked to, at least to my knowledge, a lack of or the weakness of governance systems at all levels. In many countries affected by internal displacement, the guiding principles and beyond that relevant law is not incorporated into domestic law. And even where this has happened, these normative frameworks remain all too often unimplemented. It can be due to a lack of political will, but very often due to a lack or the absence of sufficiently strong institutional frameworks, or simply the shortage of resources. At the UN level, the issue of internal displacement has still no real institutional home. True, humanitarian organizations do a great job in saving lives, in helping the displaced. But there is no organization or agency with an explicit mandate to protect, assist IDPs, and to find durable solutions for them. No coherent processes, despite once in a while a discussion in the Human Rights Council, no coherent processes exist where internal displacement would be regularly discussed and decided among member states, as is the case in other areas of UN activities. The important mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs is a voluntary position. It's not sufficiently equipped to play the key advocacy role that would be necessary to make real progress, to bring down the ever-increasing number of internally displaced persons. While the Interagency Standing Committee's so-called cluster system undoubtedly has contributed to having a more predictable, a more coherent, a more effective humanitarian response in emergency situations, the cluster system is ill-equipped to effectively address particularly serious protection issues, to really address protracted displacement, to help to find durable solutions. Despite all the present discussions about the humanitarian development nexus, the UN's new way of working, despite the commendable fact that some governments have started to integrate internal displacement issues into their national development plans, despite all of that, durable solutions do require development rather than humanitarian interventions, and this remains an elusive goal for most communities affected by protracted internal displacement. Let me conclude. On another of my missions, I met a group of internally displaced persons, somewhere hiding in a tropical forest. We had been traveling by boat for quite some time to meet them, and they, the IDPs, had been walking for hours to meet me. And I still remember the words of their leader, a clearly malnourished man in ragtag clothing. They intimidated us, killed some of us, chased us away from our lands, was what he said. We are hungry, we are sick, we fear for our lives, nobody helps us. But at least we know that we have rights. We know the guiding principles, he said, and these principles tell us what they are doing to us is wrong. Maybe one day there will be justice. This gives us hope. This gives us hope. This is the power of the guiding principles. They are more than a tool providing practical advice. They embody a legal and moral vision of what internally displaced persons need and are entitled to in order not to be left behind. Let us work together that the guiding principles and all our efforts to address internal displacement issues do not become an empty promise. Let's give higher visibility, more priority to discussions on how to address the challenges I just outlined and how to find effective answers to them. Let's join hands to ensure that the guiding principle and their promises become reality for the millions and millions of IDPs all over the world, including those men, women, children that are fleeing right now as I speak. Thank you very much.